We are Via Masi Productions. My name is James. I'm the owner and founder of Via Masi. I have 10 years experience within the field, within project, specializing in project management and digital project management. We also have Luca as well.
Yes, basically, I'm a video editor. I've been editing videos since I was about 8 years old. And I also graduated in communications from Vania College and majoring in video production. And am now still studying in video editing. So that's my field. And Patrick as well is a video editor.
Yeah, basically followed the same, me and Luca followed the same path, exactly the same path. We went to the same college. Yeah, we're glad to be working together, and we're all like a family business. So, it's a good thing.
Perfect. So yeah, we'll get started. So before, we're going to give you a little bit of a backstory. So we've worked with Fortune 500 companies such as McDonald's and Orange Theory, and now working with a little bit more and more creators. So today we're going to be talking about the fundamentals of video. So get your notebook out, ask questions, and get involved. So within the fundamentals of video, we have a 3-step process. We have framing, we have audio, and we have performance. So I'm going to have Luca take the stage and talk to us a little bit about framing.
So there's a lot to cover in framing. So it's going to take a little bit to get over everything, but the basics of the fundamentals of framing are mise-en-scène, rule of thirds, shooting formats, lighting, movement, focal distance. I'm going to touch on pretty much all of these things, some lightly and some more in depth. So with mise-en-scène means everything that is within the frame that can account for your background, your foreground. Basically, it's the composition of your frame. It's the setting, the scenery. This can account for items, desks, so on and so forth. This is there's a bunch of boxes in the background, a little bit in the foreground, and that accounts for your mise-en-scène. It's just your set design. And we have a couple more examples. So in here, it's Blade Runner 2049. You have these statues or figures on the left and right side. You have the architecture, that's the mise-en-scène. And here we have an example from American Psycho. This can actually be a little bit closer to the reality of what you guys are going to be reproducing. We want office or, studio sets. So here you have just a regular office room and the executive room, whatever have you. And you would find what items would normally be in that room because it's trying to convince you of a feeling. And another thing that I'm going to be trying to do, for you guys is explain why this is important. Mise-en-scène is important because it gives you, or it gives the audience a feeling of, comprehension of the frame. In addition to it adds value to your video. You don't always want to just be talking behind a black, just regular canvas behind you, because that can be generally boring and you will lose retention pretty regularly. And then following up on that, we have the rule of thirds. This isn't really so much a rule as it is a formula. It's just to basically designate the sections of your frame and how you should line up subjects. So right here, we have an example from Blade Runner 2049. I know, again, we're going to see this a couple of times. It's one of my favorite movies. But here we have the subject directly in the middle of the frame, and it is the middle third of the frame, obviously. Here we have, yet again, Wolf of Wall Street, but this also showcases that you have your subject in the middle of the screen and other elements on both left and right. It's not just a simple centered subject. And you could see often there's a bunch of compositions of this. It's just to basically direct where your eyes are looking. And that's how that works. Obviously, you can break this quote-unquote rule in certain instances, but it just is naturally where your eyes gravitate towards, especially if you're working with a 16:9 format. And we're going to get into formats a little bit later. But here, talking about when you're viewing content on a phone, portrait mode, it's going to obviously have to be in the middle of the screen, because if it's solely on the left and right, you're typically going to be cutting off the subject, which doesn't necessarily look too good. Here we have they're not directly in the left and right of the frame, but you could see that the action is centered one in the frame, and then you have your two subjects on left and right on the two divisions. And now we come up to shooting formats, and this is basically just the resolution that you're shooting in. It can be, I suppose, like 16:9 and 9:16, as I was saying. So 9:16 is the regular viewing format for video content on your phone. If you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be 16:9. It's basically just the aspect ratio of your screen. So when you flip your screen, it goes to 16:9. When you have it in portrait mode, it's 9:16. So you don't really need to get into it too much more than that, but resolution is relevant. When you're shooting, you want to be making sure that you're either shooting in 1920 by 1080 resolution or 4K resolution. And all of your modern day Android or iOS phones are going to be able to shoot in 4K. Anything above like an iPhone 10 should be able to shoot in 4K, even probably prior to that. I'm not entirely 100% certain on that, but you should probably be able to shoot in 4K. So you should be shooting in 4K. And you may be asking, well, why, if it's going to be going up on just Instagram or wherever have you, would you shoot in that resolution? It's because it gives more data for the application to source from, and especially if you're editing it, it gives you more leg room to make adjustments in the editing process, and then you could export in 1920 by 1080 if you prefer to do that. So for example, we shoot in 4K Ultra HD, and then we export in 1920 by 1080 because Instagram sometimes has a difficult time dealing with 4K files. And carrying on, we also have the lighting. And now lighting is a often overseen aspect of the framing or overall video elements, but it is a crucial aspect that a lot of people need to focus on. I struggled with it for a pretty long period of time, but once you experiment and get your hands on it firsthand, you're going to be able to figure out, there's several different forms of lighting or several different methods. You can either go the route of studio or natural. Those are the most common. I think I'm not entirely certain if there's any more beyond that, but studio and natural lighting are the ones that you're typically going to be using. Natural lighting is just to dictate, you have sunlight or the lighting that is already within your room or environment that you can be shooting in. And the issue with natural lighting is that it's not all that controllable. And if you're dealing with sunlight, it's very unpredictable in those instances. If you're by a window or outside, you can't necessarily control those circumstances of whether or not it's going to be a sunny day or a foggy day or whatever have you. So it's that unpredictability that often makes people a little bit uncertain about working with natural lighting. Now, 3-point or just studio lighting is a lighting method that has 3 lighting setups positioned around your subject. This is more so for like one subject scenes. You're not going to be seeing studio lighting or 3-point lighting for everything. But here we have a fill light, a key light, and a backlight. So what is a fill light? A fill light is to fill the lighting. It's in the name, is to fill the lighting within your frame. It's basically going to be covering the entirety of your subject. But then we have a key light, a spotlight for your subject. That's going to be basically distributing the main portion of your light. And then the fill light is just soft lighting to fill in those shadows. Ring lights are a good option for starters, for sure. And if you're going to be using one, you should be putting it at roughly about a 45-degree angle above yourself so that you can get some overhead light. You're going to be filling in most of your frame, or directly head on. It's all about experimentation again, because I can't guarantee your lighting within your room, or your shooting environment. So it's entirely dependent on that. Which is why I suggest experimentation. So the 3-point lighting setup is, it's basically a surefire way to light your subject, but I wouldn't recommend 3-point lighting because to just finish up, a backlight, you have your key light, the fill light, and then your backlight. Backlight is basically, even though you have 2 lights lighting your subject, you're still going to have a little bit of shadows right behind the individual. And that's when you introduce a backlight if you deem it necessary. It's not entirely all that necessary. And we actually use a 2-light setup, which is more than optimal. I wouldn't suggest that if you're going to be investing a lot of money into lighting, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be a lot of money, but you should invest some portion of your business into lighting if you're doing video production. And it should most likely go toward a 2-light setup versus the basic ring light setup. because you're going to have a little bit more control and a little bit more leg room for experimentation in that area. Now we have movement of the frame, and that's to say you have several types of movement that you could, or lack thereof for that matter. You have movement methods in the sense of tripod, handheld, and gimbal. So if you're going to be shooting video, obviously, and you're going to be shooting your subject is yourself, you're going to be placing your camera on a tripod and not moving it at all. So that's one option for movement. It's just completely stationary. And now if you're shooting somebody and you want to keep it stable, you could also use tripod, but you have the other two options of incorporating a little bit of movement, and that comes in the forms of handheld and gimbal. So going handheld, obviously, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's use your hands. And that takes a little bit of experimentation as well. You have to figure out, one, not being too shaky and being relatively stable, but also comfortable enough to know how to frame your subject. And then using a gimbal. A lot of people don't know what a gimbal is. A gimbal is just a stabilizer that you place your camera on to stabilize your footage. And basically, whatever force your camera is pushing toward, it will counteract that and keep it directly centered where you are pointing your lens.
I think one key thing that you were also saying was actually the phone now, the newest iPhone.
Yes.
That feature.
So gimbals can be pretty costly. They can, some of them can go upward of $1,000. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest investing your money in a gimbal. But if you have the, let's say, latest iPhone 14 Pro, or even some of the latest Androids have an action mode or something along that vein, which is basically a extra stabilization method that is already built into your phone that you can use on a dime and actually really functions near to what a gimbal can produce on the regular. So if you aren't really necessarily interested in investing in a gimbal for $1,000 or less or above that, and you have an iPhone 14 Pro that you already bought for $1,000, there you go. You have a gimbal already. It's in your camera and you can shoot with that, no problem. But that is to say, if you're shooting a subject other than yourself. And then continuing on, we have focal distance. Now, this is actually an improper example of it, but I'm just putting it here to show you the difference in focal length. So focal length is basically how far you have your lens zoomed in. So if you take your camera on your phone and you zoom it in, you're increasing the focal length. It will go from, let's say, 30 millimeters, or I'm not entirely certain what the average is for cameras. I would say probably like 24 millimeters, and then it'll bring it up to 200 millimeters, let's say. That will be digital instead of optical, but it's just to show that it is increasing the zoom. And now here we have a subject that is being reframed while they're also adjusting the focal length whilst keeping him exactly in the same position in the frame. And that changes the way that your subject looks. So here, if you have it at about a 20 millimeter, you're going to see that the background is further away and your subject looks a little bit more contoured, a little bit more three-dimensional. But the further that you pull your camera away and increase that focal length, you will see that your subject becomes flatter and the background comes closer. But we also have focal distance in the sense of your framing. So I was speaking a little bit earlier about rule of thirds, and this is something to dictate your shot compositions. So we have a pretty standard way of doing this. It's to dictate, you have long shots, medium shots, and close-ups. And there's a bunch of different compositions, variations of these specific shots. You could do a wide shot, you could do a medium shot, you could do a medium wide shot, you could do a close-up, an extreme close-up, an extreme long shot. It's basically just stating how far your frame is and how close it is. And it's just a specification to dictate whether, like, how close the frame is to your subject or your subjects. And now we come on to audio. And audio is pretty simple, but it's much simpler than framing, than everything within your frame. But basically, the fundamentals of audio go as follows. You have your microphones, you have your vocal volume delivery, you have your sound environment, and then you have sound isolation / sound absorption. So for audio, I wouldn't suggest anything beyond a lavalier mic or a shotgun. A lot of people tend to use their built-in microphones. Some people will use their iPhone, right, to shoot video, and they'll just use the onboard microphone that comes with the iPhone. If you don't have money to invest in a proper lavalier mic or shotgun mic, I wouldn't actually suggest buying anything for that matter, anything that's cheap. It's better to save your money and invest in something that is less of a budget-friendly option, because audio is something that makes or breaks video sometimes. Sometimes it'll sound like people are speaking through a tunnel, because they're just recording with a $20 microphone that they got off of Amazon. So I would recommend just sticking to your phone camera. In certain instances, it's actually better. Let's say you're shooting with a camera. I would actually recommend not shooting with your camera's onboard microphone. I would suggest using your phone's microphone at certain instances, because the audio quality of microphones on phones are pretty decent, relatively speaking. But that's also dependent on how you position it. So you want to have let's say you're using a shotgun microphone. A shotgun microphone is placed directly in front of the subject that is speaking or the audio source, and you want to have it directly head on. That's what the point is. The labeling is for, is to say shotgun. It's right in front of your subject. And lavalier mics, they work in the sense of pinning it right at about a 45-degree angle on your collar, and then you just leave it there, and your subject will hear you clear as day. I would recommend the use of shotgun mics for studios, but it's actually probably optimal that if you're recording dialogue or just vocal or vocals in general, I would recommend sticking with lavalier mics, because it's just the best option in capturing dialogue and vocals. And then carrying on to vocal volume. This is something as well in the line of performance, but I'm putting it here in audio because it's obviously to do with the volume of your audio. If you are a speaker and the focal point of your video is, your vocals, I would definitely recommend checking whether or not you are speaking too loud or too low. So vocal delivery is pretty important, and you have to keep in mind the volume in which you are speaking. So it's, some people, they could just be shouting at the top of their lungs, or they can be whispering to a fault. And you want to make sure that you are both, heard, but not breaking somebody's phone speakers. And then we come down to sound environment. So sound environment is just to dictate whether or not you're inside or outside. I would often recommend shooting inside, just because you're going to have a better sound environment in general. But if you live with multiple people, that also comes into question. You want to be able to, for example, we live with my entire family, and we have a baby, and we have 3 dogs, right? So that is difficult to manage in terms of sound environment. So we have an office room here that we've set up. We have some phone panels to absorb sound in terms of reverb or echo. But basically, sound environment is just to dictate whether or not people are talking or not. And if you are outside, another point to make is that you're going to have a little bit more interesting mise-en-scène, which is why some people like shooting outside. It's just a better environment to shoot in. It's more visually captivating and interesting for the viewer, and it will often increase retention. But then you also have the issue of just sound pollution. So you'll have, let's say, cars in the nearby distance, or you'll have planes passing by, or somehow you'll hear a fire truck going by or something along those lines. So shooting inside is a surefire way of basically eliminating most of that sound, but then you also have to deal with people. So, and then carrying on to, now that we've spoken about sound environment, how do you eliminate some of that sound if you are in a situation that you can't get away from it, right? So it comes down to sound isolation and sound absorption. So as you can see in this photo, it's a pretty enclosed room, which means that since it's not that big, there's not a lot of space for the sound to bounce off of. So if you were to be in a bigger room, there would be a bigger echo. There would be more reverb. And the way that we can reduce some of this reverb is with sound absorption. So the isolation comes into a question of how large your room is. So how much reverb is already present. And then absorption comes in the form of foam panels or just foam absorption. So how does foam work to basically, it blocks out sound and it absorbs sound. So it'll maintain the sound within your environment. And you could basically just set it up on your walls in the same way that we have here, or the way that is showcased in the photo, and it will do a pretty decent job at eliminating some of the reverb in your audio and decreasing any other sound pollution outside of your shooting studio. And then we come down to the final element, and that is performance. And that is very simple. I don't even have any slides for this. So this is just the fundamentals of performance. Obviously, performance is all about getting comfortable. You want to be comfortable in your own, skin, however you be. You want to be able to showcase a level of confidence on camera. So take your time while shooting. Don't rush yourself. It is going to be cleaned up in editing. You don't have to worry about necessarily just doing it one take. That's it. Unless you like doing long takes, it's not necessary anymore. We have editing as an option, right? So you can clean up any mistakes that you make. So simply, if you screw up on something, anything light, go back, re-say it. That's it. Do another take. Be comfortable on camera.
Yeah. Another thing, like Luca was mentioning, is that sometimes it's better to just keep it rolling, because a lot of people, what they end up doing is sometimes they film with their phone and they film and it's like, oh no, okay, then they stop and then they film again. But then the problem with doing that is that you lose your train of thought, and certain things that we're going to mention end up getting lost. So it's best to sometimes just say it again, just keep it rolling. And after that, you could do everything in post-production. Like us, we use Premiere Pro, but honestly, there's such amazing applications out there for your phone. There's CapCut, that's an amazing tool that you could take it all.
It also adds more flexibility in editing, actually, when you mess up, surprisingly, because you might have said something really good. I'll grab that part, and then when you re-say it, I'll grab the other end of that, right? So
Yes,
there's confidence in the way you say your words. But to add on what James was saying, another solution, if you're really having trouble speaking to your camera, we just got a teleprompter. So I don't know, I don't know how expensive it was, but
But there's also ones on the app too.
there's ones on the app using your phone. So if you have a lot of trouble memorizing your own stuff, it would be a wise solution, so you don't get nervous, But yeah, anyways,
Yeah. So actually, to add on to that, teleprompters, there's a variety of options online for you to go to, but that's more so. I'm not entirely certain about the options in regards to like phone cameras or something along those lines, because obviously the vast majority of people, they shoot on their phones, right?
yeah.
So if you're shooting with a camera, it's a great option to go with the teleprompter. If you're shooting on your phone, you can even just have a paper behind it or anything along those lines. You can keep it simple. Just have notes nearby, anything to keep you on track.
Yeah. And then I think another point to add to that is that also when you're shooting your reels is just go one line at a time sometimes, because sometimes you're trying to say the whole message and sometimes you lose your train of thought. The best thing to do in that case is that say a certain word or a certain phrase, stop, think about what you want to say next, and then you go again. So, but it's at the end of the day, it's all about doing what's best, what you feel most comfortable with.
Exactly. And then we come down to delivery. So delivery is just, as I was stating a little bit earlier with vocal volume, just to get down to basics of like how you're delivering your voice. Earlier I was saying you don't want to be too loud, you don't want to be too quiet, but now we want to inject a little bit of flavor, a little bit of expression into how you deliver your content to your audience. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to inject too much in terms of expressiveness, but you could be a little bit more interesting on camera in certain instances. Some people, they can read lines as if they were a robot, and robotic delivery can lose retention very quickly. If somebody is just reading it off like, so today I was having a good time, and you're going to lose the viewer immediately.
I think to that point is that what we want you guys to do is stop. Like they say, a lot of people that you're just regurgitating what other creators are doing. What we would rather see, like also as an audience, is emulating them, adding in your own flavor, adding in your own personal perspective on that subject. Because at the end of the day, I'm following you, I'm joining your community to hear what you have to say, not what other people have to say. So
Yeah. So the best way of putting that is that just be yourself on camera. The audience will know when you're being disingenuous. So being yourself is just the optimal way to go. And then lastly is your camera presence. So on top of delivery, you have how you present yourself. You know, so you want to be able to, I guess, stand up straight, chest out, and look confident. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be confident. A lot of us aren't confident on camera. It's an anxious scenario to put a camera in front of your face and hit record. So you don't have to feel worried about that. The reality is that it's difficult. It's going to be difficult, but you have to look confident. That doesn't mean to deny being yourself, but put on a smile and put yourself out there. Be confident.
And I think to that point is, even for me, even for Bad, like when we just started, it's very, very hard. Like looking at a camera, it's like, oh no, what do I say? Like everything that I had to, like I wanted to say, I just ended up forgetting it. But honestly, the more and more that you do it, the more comfortable and more confident you end up becoming. Because if we look at one thing that we ended up putting in one of our reels is look at what are the first videos that you've done, and then look at the last video that you did. Sometimes a lot of people are very hard on themselves, but when you see the progression that you had from the first one you did to the last one you just did, you see that progression, and you'll be surprised that the more that you do it, you might not even know it yourself, but you're more confident than you actually think you are.
Exactly. There you go. And so in review, I don't know if you want to do this or
Yeah, so basically to review, so today we learned the fundamentals of video, of essentially knowing how to frame the audio and the performance.